I'm Barbara Serra. You're at The Listening Post. This week, Egyptians take to the streets in their millions, while the Mubarak government pulls the plug on media, old and new. WikiLeaks and the UK's Guardian newspaper, the battle is out in the open. Breaking the silence in Israel, giving voice to Israeli soldiers.
We were told there are no innocents. Everyone is enemy.
And Hosni Mubarak's TV address reinterpreted. Right from the very beginning, when protesters swarmed the streets of Cairo, Alexandria and Suez on the 25th of January, this story had the look and feel of a huge news event. Anti-Mubarak protesters numbered in their millions, and mobs accused of being sanctioned by the Egyptian government struck back. Media attention intensified, and the government's battle to control the message grew more desperate. The authorities pulled the plug on the country's internet. They shut down the phone service for a while and escalated attacks on journalists. Al Jazeera had its broadcasting license withdrawn, and our reporters were even held under arrest for their coverage of events. As anti-Mubarak demonstrators orchestrated one of the biggest political protests in recent Arab history, Egypt's online activists and reporters from the region and around the world resisted government crackdowns. The Listening Post's Salah Hadar reports now on a protest that came together online, dominated headlines and sent tremors all the way from Sana'a in Yemen to Washington, D.C. in the United States.
What we're seeing in Egypt is that there is a momentum now that is in all likelihood unstoppable.
Does this now mean that President Mubarak can't continue with people in the streets like this?
You know, people talk about televising the revolution. It's tweeting the revolution, Facebooking the revolution, videotaping the revolution, whatever we can.
Thousands of Egyptians poured into the streets across the country.
This is a very, very peculiar moment in media history, I think. I think this is a very revolutionary moment.
Of all the bizarre output broadcast by the Egyptian state channel, this was surely evidence of the disconnect between the Egyptian state and its people. Simultaneous with Nile TV's broadcast of this music video were transmissions from global satellite television showing footage of over 1 million Egyptians amassed in Cairo's Tahrir Square. The contrast between state TV and satellite broadcasters was stark, but not surprising.
When you look at the Egyptian state television, it's really, for many people, look at it a joke. You know, nobody takes that media seriously, and you see the huge contrast between the state media and the coverage from Al Jazeera and other satellite channels.
The Egyptian state television has turned to typical propagandistic broadcasting. There's virtually no information about the protest. So the Egyptians right now are subjected to two parallel media discourses. The first shows Egypt literally up in flames, and on the other hand you've got footage of the Egyptian regime asserting their control of the country.
Asserting control isn't that easy anymore. The Arab media landscape is no longer the exclusive preserve of state-controlled outlets. The last 15 years have seen a lot of change.
You've had the satellite television revolution that allowed Arabs, you know, from Morocco all the way to Iraq to see what was happening in each other's countries. And then you had a kind of independent media revolution, which saw the birth of independent newspapers that were not affiliated to any political parties and obviously not the state. You've had the social media revolution, in which young people, the region is mostly young people, have taken to Facebook, Twitter, blogs, YouTube, all these new types of social media.
But with revolt on the streets escalating, the Mubarak government grew desperate for control of communications. At midnight on the 27th, the government disconnected Egypt from the World Wide Web.
The Egyptian government has stepped up its clampdown on the media and communication services.
Since the early morning hours of Friday, the internet has effectively been shut down in Egypt.
4 of the country's 5 main internet service providers were ordered to shut down all international connections to the web in Egypt. An estimated 93% of the country's networks were unreachable, It was one of the most extensive internet blackouts to date, but it came too late. When internet connections came back briefly on the 2nd of February, we managed to speak with Mohammed Salim, a Cairo-based lecturer. He talked to us about his 6 days in Egypt's internet vacuum.
I truly missed Facebook, I missed Twitter, I missed the internet, but there's something more powerful was being organized in the Egyptian street. In front of every apartment building, people, instead of communicating via webcam and via the internet and via Facebook, they were communicating face-to-face for the first time in 10 years.
We were getting information from our friends, from our colleagues, from journalists in Egypt who were on Twitter providing information. Their voices went dead when the internet cutoff happened. At that point, Al Jazeera became tremendously important because it became one of the few ways of seeing what was going on directly in Egypt.
The protests were the biggest story in the Arab region, and Al Jazeera ran with it. On the 30th of January, the clampdown came. Egypt's information minister withdrew the network's license and cancelled staff accreditations.
6 Al Jazeera news staff were arrested, then released the day after the authorities shut down the channel's operations.
The network continued broadcasting